Thank you for joining us today. As you know, my name is Helen Cole, and I am the founder of the Gene Collective. The Gene Collective is a local Sarnia Lambton initiative developed by a group of women who bring their own unique skills and experience to the collective. Our hope is to inspire and educate women to become more active in local politics and thus increase gender parity in local government. That certainly is our hope. However, tonight I'm going to introduce you to Lisa Isaac, and I think her presentation is relevant whether you wish to get involved in politics or just make some improvements in your communication. Lisa is a certified HR leader and professional, passionate about helping leaders with their people. Her authentic approach to leadership is to work in partnership for sustainable success. In this session, Lisa brings her extensive experience to the Gene Collective. Participants will learn the importance of effective communication, how to utilize tools that have the greatest impact, how to positively share ideas to maximize support, how to market themselves, and how to develop a personal brand. And I should say that Lisa has been one of the formative members of the Gene Collective and has been so very helpful as we developed it. Her business has become very busy, so now she helps us when we ask her. At any rate, welcome, Lisa, and thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to share your knowledge with us.
Thank you so much, Helen, for inviting me. I'm going to share my screen here. So I'll give you guys a few little tips for using Zoom in an effective way. I'm always learning new things on Zoom, but now that I'm sharing my screen, if you do want to be able to still see all of the video and the screen at the same time, you can go to, if you're on a Microsoft product, you can go to the top right-hand corner where it says view and then pick gallery. And if you pick side by side, you can actually put all the faces on the side by side and you can drag that window open a little bit more to see all of the people. It does make the presentation slides a little bit smaller, but I'm just going to talk to those anyway. So that's just a little helpful tip for anyone when we're trying to be engaging, but also still, you kind of still want to see everybody, but you still want to see what's on the screen. So that's a little helpful tip for you. So I am going to be talking through this. I'm happy to be interrupted. I'm happy to have questions. I'm happy to have examples. I'm much happier when I present that it's engaging. First of all, that way I know you're actually listening and I'm not just here talking to myself, which is great though, because we're recording it. So some of these clips I'm sure can be used in the future, but I always love having an engaging session. And so some ways that you can do that, I want to make sure that everyone is able to interact and engage in a way that's most comfortable for them. So if you want to put anything into the chat box, you are absolutely welcome to do that. And I can see that. I'm just going to open it up here. So I've got it. Perfect. So there's the chat box. There's also using the reactions tools, which I absolutely love. So they're down on the little toolbar at the bottom of your Zoom screen. There's always the good old unmute and say, excuse me, I have a question. Absolutely, you can do that. And also if you have your video on, you can jump around and wave all your arms and go like this, because I can see all of you as well. So whatever way you are most comfortable engaging, I know it's, sometimes we're just getting home from dinner, we're, you just want to lounge, you've been at work all day, you don't want your video on, absolutely fine. So just hope that you're still paying attention and engaging and getting value out of this session in a way that works for you. So now that we've kind of gone through that, what are we actually doing? Before we jump into things, I do like to kind of set the stage. This is always a place to ask questions and to learn. So like Helen said, we're here to educate and to inform, which means we need to have an open mind and be ready to ask those questions and treat people with respect and be open and make sure that we're bringing kind of our full selves to this. You'll get out of it what you put into it. And it's always more engaging when everybody is kind of participating in the way that makes sense. So I just would like, that's just some of the things that I would expect. And I hope you can kind of reflect on what you want to get out of this as well. So when we look at what are we talking about, so when Helen introduced me, and I will get to talk a little bit more about myself, but first of all, what are we talking about today? We're talking about effective communication. We're talking about some tools. I'm going to list off a whole bunch of tools, but think of it like the toolbox. Okay, so you have a toolbox, wherever it is, in your closet, in your garage. You're not going to use all of those tools all the time. You're going to go to the toolbox, you're going to open it up, you're going to take the tool that you need to do the job you need to do, and then you're going to put it away. You know where it is, you put it back, it's there for next time. So I'm going to show you a whole bunch of tools in your toolbox. You do not need to use all of them. Okay, when you pick the ones that you need, you pick one that resonates with you. And those are just really the ones that are there. So I'm going to throw a whole bunch of them at you and kind of ask questions or use the ones that are most appropriate for you. And then we'll just tie it all in at the end on how does this actually help you continue to market yourself? What is that brand that you bring? And how do you leverage kind of a more effective communication to make sure that that brand is continuing on? So why are we here? So I have our goal here up in the top right-hand corner. So the Gene Collective goal: to encourage, educate, and prepare women for politics, to create parity in politics with a focus on municipal government, specifically in Lambton County, and to create a better informed and educated electorate to advocate for change. So these are important. Really, I think the session that I'm kind of focusing on here, the tools and the things that I'm bringing here really touch on that first point about encourage, educate, and prepare. And Helen said it just perfectly. Whether you're thinking of running for politics or not, we can probably all use some tips for more effective communication, regardless if it's just in our daily lives. So hopefully you'll find some good nuggets out of this. And so a bit about me. So why am I here? There's a few reasons, right? So Helen, I've been part of the Gene Collective and I'm happy to support and educate. My business is really all about giving people resources to do things better. That's what I'm passionate about. That's what I do. That's how I live my life. I'm an HR professional, so human resources, dealing with people. When you're in politics, you deal with people. So these are very related things, I think. I also did, my first undergrad was in international political science. I've got all my fancy dance. I was going through my textbooks earlier and I was like, yes, city politics in Canada. I was like, no, this is an old book. It's seen some days. So, I mean, I've got a good history. I'm interested in it. I'm currently I'm on a board of directors, which is a whole different world for me. So it's pretty new, but I had to run for that. And now I'm kind of in this world, which is very interesting. And I have also myself, I've run in my home community. I've run for chief twice as well in those elections. And so I've got some interest and I'm happy to support people as we kind of go through this journey. So I want you to reflect, what do you want to get out of this? And as you think through that, kind of write those things down, because when we get to the end, when we get to the discussion part, I want to make sure that we've touched on some of these, and that if there's things in here that you didn't get out of this that you thought maybe you would, happy to have those and even to share with Helen so that we can always make these sessions better as well going forward. Okay, how does that sound? I'm gonna ask you to engage in a way. So whether it's chat, I see a physical thumbs up. We've got some, just want to make sure everybody's okay. You can hear me. You're in the right meeting. Good. I've got a reaction. I love it. All right. Beautiful. Okay, so let's jump into things. So the importance of effective communication. So when we're talking about this, so I've got some things here. So communication and other soft skills, and we're talking about things like emotional intelligence, right, which is a very important thing. We're talking about what is communication, and I have some good tips about that as well. How do you know if you're doing communication effectively? Well, you have to know how you're doing it at all. So it's always important to do a self-assessment to try and understand, how am I doing, reflecting on my own communication. Is it effective? Is it not effective? What parts are effective? What's not? Where do I want to focus my energies? What do I want to work on? And then talking a bit about these 5 stages of group development, right? So we communicate with others because we live in a society, we live in a group, and there are other people around us that we have to communicate with. So this is, and we'll go through a bit of these. Again, some of them are tools that you're welcome to take, and I'm going to share with you a lot of the things that I have are relevant in the workplace, but I think they're very transferable to kind of if we're looking to run for politics or support in politics, and even just supporting women and our colleagues as we go. So emotional intelligence. So I like showing this because it does show kind of a wide variety of all the things. And so I think about when we're talking about effective communication, and we'll get to the definition of it a little bit on the next page here. It's really about kind of doing that self-reflection and thinking, well, what is my awareness? What is my own, like this kind of my sense of how I appear in the world. And these are all things that you can have influence on, you can work at them, you can develop them. We're better at some of these than others. Naturally, we're all very different individuals, different people. And so our skills are always kind of, you know, varied. We're not unilaterally good or bad at any of these things. We just have different levels of development. And so when we think about kind of all of these pieces, you can see in the bottom, kind of bottom right hand there, communication fits in under social skills. So it is one of the things that really we talk about when we're looking at having that emotional intelligence and being able to talk to people and work with people and all sorts of people. It's really important to be able to be aware of kind of all of the pieces that go into that. And so emotional intelligence is just one of those ways just to be able to kind of ground ourselves in how does communication fit into this. So when we actually look at communication, I love this because it's the exchange of information between a sender and a receiver. So if I'm just sitting here talking to a blank wall, I'm not really communicating necessarily. It does involve some interaction. I love this too. If the meaning isn't shared, communication hasn't taken place. So when we're talking really about communication, it is about saying something and having someone else get it, right? And so how do we do that effectively? It's really about, and this is from an employment perspective, but it's really about making sure we're doing that well. And I think it's so important to think back and reflect on ourselves to understand, how do I communicate? And what does that really mean? And am I doing it well? We may think we're doing it well, but it's important to ask people around us. And when we talk about the self-assessment, you can do some quizzes, you can do all sorts of stuff, but ask other people how they perceive your communication, and maybe there are areas that could be improved on. Okay, so effective communication is good. It actually has a strong business case. Poor communication actually reduces effectiveness of organizations, right? It degrades that trust. So very, very important to understand this. And communication can be verbal, it can be written, it can be body language. So there's so many ways that communication fits into things. When we look at, I think of an example. So when we look at competencies in HR, so if we're looking at doing performance evaluations, for example, there's, you know, a whole set of competencies. There's about 70 or 80 kind of standard scholarly, research, peer-reviewed competencies of which a person can be kind of ranked on, and how are they doing? Are they, you know, are they good? Are they over? Are they using it well? Are they not using it well? Do they need to learn more? All of this stuff. Communication is not one of them. Okay, out of all of these 80 competencies, communication itself is not one, because it is so broad. When we say, am I good at communication? It's very, very, very difficult to identify exactly what you mean by that. So written communication is very different from facilitating, which is very different from presenting, which is very different from recording webinars and putting them up, which is different from individual one-on-one conversations, bigger groups, smaller groups, speaking in public, right? So there's all these different ways that we can communicate. And it's very difficult to say whether I'm a good communicator or a bad communicator, but it's really about all the different elements that come into it. And then the self-assessment. It's always love the good old SWOT. So looking at what are the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. When you think of all of the pieces of communication, where am I good, and where could I potentially use some improvement? And there's also some fun online quizzes that you can do, some mind tools. And when Helen sends this out, it'll have the link on here for you. So you can even just click on that one. But honestly, you can just Google effective communication self-assessment, and you'll get a whole bunch of things. And really, it's not really the score that comes out of this that I think is really critical for you, but it's really about having that reflection and saying, oh yeah, well, how do I communicate this way? What does this mean to me? Or when have I done that well? Or when have I, done that I didn't feel so good about it at the end? And then kind of making sure that you're bringing those together and articulating it. As we go through, a lot of the tools that I'm sharing with you are ways for you to think through this process in order to really articulate, how do I communicate? What am I really good at? What do I need to work on? Because that all really goes into making sure that you're continuing to build your brand and your own identity and marketing yourself. Okay. So these are just some ideas. And then again, why do we do this? Because we are social people, and we work with other people and we live with other people, and we have people that we manage communities and governments with. And so I always love to remind ourselves, and I learned this way back in school, but often I bring it out if there's any kind of conflict, and I try to understand, why is there conflict with people? Why am I not getting along with this person? Why is this project not moving forward? Why am I not able to have a conversation without getting really angry at talking to this person? And I always like to go back to this and just kind of reflect and say, okay, where is my relationship at with them? Are we still in this forming stage where we're, awkward strangers? Are we storming? The storming phase is actually, it's the most uncomfortable phase. And so we have to skip over it thinking, no, we're good. We'll just jump right to norming performing and we're good to go. And that's often when we see a lot of conflict with people. And then sometimes I bring this out, and yeah, I'm guilty of this myself, to go, yeah, no, I totally jumped over the storming phase. We actually have to go back to that, regroup. We need to have this piece where we can have this discussion and dialogue and understand why we're doing what we're doing in order to move forward. And this is what I really love about tools, is being able to pull this out and show it to people, because it makes it a little bit less of a difficult conversation to have. So again, you'll have these slides, and you can always refer back to them. And these are all things that you just Google the 5 stages of group development, and you'll have all sorts of beautiful images and learning to follow up on it if you need it. So that's a bit about effective communication. So what is it? Why is it there? Why are we talking about it today? Because it is so important. Okay. Some of the tools we have. So I'm going to go through these. Again, this is your toolbox. Don't think that you need to learn and know and memorize all of these. Some of these you may absolutely hate, you may disagree with. Some of them you may be like, oh yeah, I really need this. Or I have a friend or a partner who could really learn from a little bit of this, if I could just share that with them. But again, it's about taking what's effective for you and using those. When we talk about effective communication, it has to be authentic. You cannot fake good, effective communication. So it's important to find the things that are real to you and how you communicate and what your values are. And again, that all ties into your branding. And so it's really important to find those things that are, like I said, that are you. If they're not you, put them aside. They're for somebody else. That's totally fine. Find the thing that's for you and carry on. So we'll talk about respectful conflict, the change curves and feedback models. We've got some advocacy and inquiry scales, levels of consensus, some tips for building confidence in meetings, some phrases that are authentic to you and you're comfortable with, and some brainstorming with a tool called STORMBOARD. So again, these are just some ideas. You've probably heard from some of these. I know I even brought out, I think I brought some of the, did I bring out the levels of consensus, Helen, in some of our meetings? I'm not sure if I did or not. I learned it in a board meeting. Really convenient tool on Zoom because it's visual. So again, just some ways to try and effectively have that sender and that receiver understanding the message, right? Which is what we're doing in communication. So as we go through these as well, and maybe even at the end, I'm happy to hear some other tools that others may have used that are effective. So, and again, these are in my world, these are in the workplace, but again, I think they're very transferable. When we think about conflict and respect, and I think specifically respect in the workplace, but respect anywhere, you want to deal respectfully with people. It doesn't mean you have to like everybody. It doesn't mean you have to be friends with everybody. It doesn't mean you have to agree with everything everybody says, but you do have to be respectful to people. Okay? And we have laws in place that make sure that employers and others are making sure that we all have a respectful and safe environment to be in. So on the left here, respect. So respectful disagreement. Absolutely. Let's have differences of opinions. Let's discuss them. Let's share our point of view, and I'll give you some feedback models and some other ways that you can do that, but do it respectfully. And so it's not about attacking another person, it's about talking about ideas, right? We all have our own perspectives. What I love, I often do this with a Tim Hortons can. So I've got my soda water here. It's not a beer, it's a soda water. And so if I hold it up like this, okay, and I'm looking, and from my perspective, I see the Canada Dry symbol, it says club soda, it's lemon lime, we've got 350 milliliters. You're looking from that perspective, you see the nutritional value, okay? We are looking at physically the exact same can. We are literally looking at the same can, but we have different perspectives because of where we come from. So what you see is the nutritional value, and you learn that there's absolutely nothing in soda water except for a little bit of sodium and potassium. Whereas I see the marketing and the flashy and, and that kind of thing, but we're literally looking at the same can. So we all have different perspectives, and it's important to recognize that and be okay with that. right? You're not wrong that you're talking about sodium and potassium. And I'm not wrong that there's 355 milliliters in this can. But it's important to just recognize that and make sure that that kind of conflict is, we can have this discussion respectfully. When we start moving through this scale, it's when we start getting into the more danger zone. And those are places that we definitely don't want to be. So conflict is good. Well, respectful conflict is good, done respectfully. Okay. So I'll leave that one at that. The change curve. So again, this is another great, this one's a little busy, I know. But if we think of this just as a general idea, we all as human beings go through change in different ways, in different speeds, different times. This curve, so you can kind of see the curve, it starts on the left with anxiety. So if something is changed or something's new or something is different, often we'll feel anxiety and then we'll get happy about it, but then we kind of work ourselves into this fear and threat and guilt. And then there's a bit of a turning point where we may eventually accept it, or we may actually become hostile and reject it, right? So as humans, we all come into this, we can go forward, backwards, we can loop around, we can be stuck in one spot for a long time. There's no right or wrong. What I love about this is that it's reminding me that I may be in one spot on this change curve and the person I'm talking to or the people I'm talking to may not. So I think it's really important when we're talking about effective communication, right? Who is your audience? Where are they at? What message are you trying to convey? Because if we're going back to that sender receiver point of view, it's important to recognize that we're not all exactly in the same place. Right? So yes, we're all talking about my soda water, but we have different perspectives. So let's talk about that and see where we get. And ultimately where we want to get is eventually with any change, we always want to get to the acceptance and the moving forward part. So we look at some coaching styles. I like this because again, another way to communicate. Often we use this when, again, in conflict, right? Because it's easy to have conversations when everything is happy and everyone agrees and we're all moving forward. But when we're in conflict, that's usually when we need a bit more of these skills. So when we look here, this is a continuum of coaching styles, but you can use this in a way when you're working with either a person or a group. And there's kind of this spectrum. So advocacy, which is your push style, you're telling, you're instructing, you're bossing people around, right? That's one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum is inquiring, where you're pulling, you're asking questions and you're really just trying to listen and understand. And there's a whole spectrum of things in the middle, depending on kind of where you are. And again, who is your audience? What are you trying to accomplish? What are you trying to convey? What message is trying to be communicated? Maybe you are the receiver in this case. Maybe you're the sender. Both things are important, and it's important to understand where you're at. And even then understanding, again, if we go back to that self-assessment, what am I necessarily maybe not so good at, right? And I pull this tool out and I think, okay, maybe I'm not necessarily really great at giving feedback or making suggestions, and I maybe want to work on that piece a little bit. So this is, again, is just another tool to help understand where are you at and recognize, again, that we're different, we're all in different places, we have different styles, different times, different moods, and that reflects on how we function with other people. Okay, some feedback models. So this is my favorite one. This one, I use this all the time, personal, business, all the time. If I have feedback to give to somebody that I'm really uncomfortable doing, I'm not a confrontational person. That is not my nature by any means. I have to practice this a lot, and I've had to do it, and I've done it for years. And it does become a little bit less anxiety inducing when I have to have a difficult conversation. But I would absolutely say practice this, right? It's the same when you learn any new skill. It's awkward, you know, and you just come back from golf. The first time you went golfing, right? You know, you saw somebody do it, but then you take that first swing. Is it perfect? No, right? You get a little bit better. Maybe you're a little sore after. Maybe you did one shot and it went way off into the bush. Those are most of mine. But you ask somebody for some help and you tweak your technique a little bit, and the next time it's a little bit better, and eventually you get better and better and better, right? So it's the same thing with learning skills like giving feedback or sharing, difficult information or having a difficult conversation. It's awkward, it feels yucky, you don't really like it the first time, but it does get easier and easier. And so this feedback model, I love it. So I call it SEED-BIC. Set the stage, is it the right time, the right place to have a conversation? always explain your view, and this big piece is that blown out part on the side. What is a behavior? So again, you're not attacking or addressing a person and their, their being. It's a behavior. It's something that somebody has done that you either didn't like or you want them to change. What was the impact of that? How did it land? What are the consequences? And I love this too, because often, we think we're really observant and we really see everything that's going on and we're really, self-aware. We're not, we think we are, but we're not really. And so it's important to have these conversations, I think, really from a good point of view too, to say, I really want to help you improve, right? Here's the behavior I saw, this is the impact it had, and here are some of the consequences. So that second E though is let me hear from your point of view. How did you see it? What was your intent, right? What did you think would happen? And I think that's part of that sender-receiver piece that we're sometimes missing, is we give feedback to people and then we don't actually stop to listen to their point of view and what actually happened, or what their side of the story is, or what their side of the soda can actually looked like. And so I think these are really important steps. And then I always love the D, determining actions together. So it's like, great, so you have an opinion, we have an opinion, what are we doing about this, right? This is just facts of life, this is where we are. Let's figure it out and move on. This guy's a level of consensus. So somebody on one of the boards I'm in shared this with me, with our group. I love it on Zoom. It's visual. So it's, if there's a decision out, so somebody asks a question and we say, okay, everybody, what is your vote, right? And you can literally put your hand up in Zoom. You could say one finger, right? 1, no, I disagree. Or 2, I sort of agree, right? Or 3, I'm okay with it. 4 is, yeah, okay, let's move on. And 5 is 100%, I absolutely agree with that. What I love about this is you ask the question and everyone puts up their hands, and anybody with a 3 or below, that means, okay, let's talk about it, right? And I hate how, we were in Zoom meetings and everyone's like, yeah, sure, I kind of agree. But then you're like, do they really agree? Or are they just saying that, right? I love this because you're like, no, I'm a 3. Like, I'm just saying that we need to talk about it. I could live with it, but I want to talk more about it. Whereas if everyone's a 5, you're like, great, cool, let's move on, right? So this is the effective part of communicating, is moving on and avoiding kind of those speeches and stuff when we don't really need to waste that time. So very cool tool. Some tips for confidence in meeting, and this was part of a mentorship program that I was in, and these tips were shared with the group. This was specifically as well for women in meetings, and trying to build our confidence, because we recognize it sometimes in meetings, especially in corporate world, and I come from a corporate world where it's mostly male dominated. Sometimes we don't necessarily as women feel as confident speaking up, and so these were just some of the tips that came out that I thought I would share. So some of it to ask intelligent questions, which really means do your homework in advance, right? Make sure you're ready, you're prepared, go beyond, don't give away your power. And this is very important, to be proud of the information, right? When you know something, when you're an expert in something, when you are that person, when you're on the stage, be proud of that, and make sure that you're recognizing that in yourself. Try not to say I'm sorry, or I think, or maybe those are a little bit more, not as confident words, so they're not as kind of definitive, right? So again, I think it comes back to even just building your own confidence. Pretend you're confident on your bad days, right? So sometimes that's harder to do. And use names, right? Learn how to use names, ask questions. So I am terrible on the spot speaker. So I actually joined Toastmasters. I have no problem if I'm talking about work, if I'm talking about something that I know about, I can sit here, I can talk for hours and days and away I go, right? But if you put me on the spot and you ask me something that I'm not prepared for, some feedback that I got from a great boss anyway, is I kind of get a deer in headlights look, and it's really not very professional, doesn't build a lot of confidence or credibility. And so that was really important for her to tell me that, and me be like, well, what do I do about this, right? I don't know what to do. So I've developed some kind of key things that I say in order to kind of almost deflect, give myself a little bit more time, and to move on with that. But also just saying that, so I know, kind of after this feedback piece, I know I need to process. So if somebody's thrown something at me and it surprised me, I'll say, okay, thank you for sharing that information. I need time to process. It is okay if I come back, right, in a couple hours or tomorrow to talk about this. So to me, that's one of those kind of key phrases I've developed. I put it in my pocket that I can whip it out when I need to, because I know that I'm not super great thinking on my feet. Toastmasters absolutely helped. It's great. It still gives me anxiety to go to that. I can't even remember what they're called, but the ones where they pull the topic out and you have 30 seconds to talk about something totally random. I hate it with a passion, but I do it to try and get better at it. Okay, so some other tips here, some other phrases when you're asking questions, right? So not just why, but tell me more about that, right? Or what makes you say that? How did you come to that? What have you seen that? Yeah, what have you experienced that made you come to that decision, right? And coming at it from a way of learning. And I really loved this. I would often do this when I was working. So I was working in the plants, and I would go to the back, an HR coming to the back, and the operators be like, "What are you doing back here?" And I'm like, "I just want to learn. Tell me about this. Tell me what you're doing. Show me what you're doing here. Tell me how that, tell me how that computer works. Tell me what you're looking at. Why are you wearing that set of coveralls versus that one," right? And just really trying to ask those questions to understand, so that people it gives them the chance, right, to talk. So that's not necessarily just in meetings, but again, it's about kind of opening up that dialogue and that conversation. And then, so when you're talking with someone, try to get someone to tell their story, right? So it's not just, right, it goes back to that sender receiver piece. If I'm just here and I'm just talk, it gets very boring. You kind of check out, you're like, hey, whatever, this person doesn't really care about me. But it's really interesting when you sit there and you try to get the other person to talk and to talk about themselves, and really just building relationships in that way. And I see Kelly Lynn relates to Toastmasters too. Oh yes, an ummer. Oh, and I'm terrible. So they count your ums and your ahs when you see, I just did it there. Thanks. When you do public speaking, and I know when I have a gap in my meetings, they get much more higher in count, many more numbers. So yeah, it's interesting how being more conscious about these things. So learning about them first of all, and then being conscious about them allows you to get better at them. So I've thrown a lot of stuff at you. This is another piece. So this is a STORMBOARD, and I believe there may not be a link, but you can Google the word STORMBOARD. But in here, you can see on this list on the side, there's a whole bunch of templates. So this is a web-based program, and it is free. And it really is like a whiteboard. You can pick all sorts of different whiteboards. There are thousands of different whiteboards on here to help you kind of organize your thoughts, your processes, and they even have an entire section called brainstorming and ideation. And so in here, I think they've got 30 or 40 different examples of boards that you can pull up. So if you're looking at your action brainstorming, you're looking at an assumption grid, there are things in here I've never even heard of, but I'm like, yes, that is absolutely something that I should do. You can do your SWOTs in here. So I just wanted to share kind of another tool to get you to thinking through and brainstorming what is it that I'm really great at, and you can highlight those and you can make them, whatever color. You can be creative. So we all work in different ways. We all process in different ways. And this is another tool to kind of get that creativity out. Even if you don't do it online with a tool like STORMBOARD, do it on paper, write it out. Because I highly recommend kind of making sure that you understand where you are coming from and what conversation you're trying to have will help you process it better, and then you'll be more effective in the long run. Okay. And then, so supporting and marketing your brand. So I've said all of these great, fantastic things, lots of tools. I've flown through them pretty fast. What I do want to know though is, and we can hold the question, the formal question part, I guess, till after, but I want you to reflect on your own skills. So if we go back to that effective communication and you're looking at your EQ, what are the things that you're really good at, and highlight those, because I want to make sure that you don't forget about those. Sometimes it's really easy to think about the things that we're terrible at or that we're really, really awful at, but making sure that we're saying, yeah, but we're also really good at this. I'm really great at these things. These are a few things that I want to do. What can you do to address them? Who are your supports? What can you offer in exchange for help? So it's always, it's not reaching, when you reach out to your network, it's always nice to be able to offer something when you're asking for help, as opposed to just going out and asking, but thinking through, well, what can I offer in exchange to support people when I need to ask for help? And then how are you articulating your brand and really putting that into something, articulate it. You need to either write it out some way to make sure that you're able to define what that is so that you can communicate it effectively. Okay. I'm going to pause there. I don't necessarily have any more slides anyway, but wanted to open it up to questions. If there's any particular tools you wanted to go back on, I'm also happy to hear about other people's examples. And I don't know, Helen, if that's where you want to stop the recording, just so that we can have more of an intimate discussion without it being recorded.